G'day, Professor Joseph Drew here. Really important video if you are a local government in New South Wales. The circulars and the instructions have come out about these additional special variations, or ASVs. Incredibly important that you understand the issues, incredibly important that you understand the potential trips and traps in the instructions, and how to present this properly to your community. Now, if you're not a local government in New South Wales, perhaps you're a Victorian one, you may still wish to stay tuned, because this is a really good example of what happens if you have an ill thought out rate capping process in a high inflationary environment. This is an example of all the complications it causes, all the angst for the community and councillors and the staff, all avoidable if we get the processes correct. So if you're in a state that's thinking about introducing this, and I imagine there will be more in the future, well then stay tuned also. Okay, so now we look at the justification. We were told there was late elections. Yes, there was, fair enough. But then we get these other points, that the rate cap was lower than expected. Is that a justification for a one-off ASV? Now, we've had lower than expected rate caps announced in many years. We're told by IPART and SRV applications to assume pegs of 2.5%. Well, in 2018-19 it was 2021-22 it was 2%, 2017-18 it was 1.5%, 2016-17 it was 1.8%. So why didn't we have an ASV in all those years? If in the future the rate peg is much lower than the assumed rate peg, will we also be given an opportunity for an ASV? We're setting a bold precedent here, but more importantly, we're confusing people. The reasoning is either it was lower than expected, in which case we always should do the same thing, or it wasn't. I just failed to follow the reasoning here. But what's even more disturbing is this idea of IPART, that the community consultation will be assumed to have been done because you did it in the IP and R process, the integrated planning and reporting process, and the council's made a resolution to go for an ASV. Now, if that is sufficient to show community consultation, why isn't that sufficient every single year to demonstrate community consultation around SRVs? It's the same process. It's the same reasoning. I'm having trouble grasping why it would be different this year but not different in future years and in past years. And the whole process comes with an awful lot of costs, and I don't think people have realised the significance of these costs. And I'm going to talk about in the next slide, so please hang on, about how you can mitigate those costs in part. Now, there's a lot of confusion in the community. The community sees you've gone for an ASV. They're not going to know the difference between an ASV and an SV. All they're going to hear and see in the media is that the council's applied for a rate increase above the peg from IPART. And guess who's going to get the blame? The councillors, the council staff, the council in total. So that's a real problem. And people aren't going to know, is this happening in the future? Is this a general twice a year process now? It's causing a lot of confusion. It's using up a lot of political capital to sell this ASV to the community through the media. Okay, you don't have to do direct community consultations, but there'll still be media inquiries about it. There'll still be complaints when people get their rates noticed. To sell that uses up political capital. Complete political capital that's then spent when you need to go for a larger SRV down the track. If you went for put your hand up for an SRV at the end of this year in November, people are going to go, hold up, you had one at the beginning of the year. How can you possibly need one again already? That's the sort of reaction it's going to bring about. As I will show later, that was unnecessary. There was a much better solution to this. Opportunity costs. Councils are spending time trying to grapple this and understand this process. It's been ill-defined and the instructions have come out so late. They could have been doing their jobs. They could have been doing their normal planning. But instead we've been doing with an extra process. So there's an opportunity cost. We've lost the opportunity to do things for the community because we've been going through this unwieldy and unnecessary process. Direct costs of meeting IPART requirements. You know, they're using two ratios. As you know, the ratios are all thought out, the benchmarks are arbitrary and unreliable, and anyone relying on those ratios to know whether they're financially sustainable or not is extremely misguided. They're not a good source of comfort at all. Why we would use them as part of this process, I don't quite understand. You could only use these ratios if you believe they were robust and their benchmarks were robust, and we know for a fact they're not. There's costs to staff and councillors. Both of them are going to cop a lot of flack from the community. staff may cop some pushback from councillors as well as pushback from the community. A lot of angst, and there was a simple, much less costly way to deal with this problem created last year when the rate peg was announced. So what should have happened? IPART should have admitted what did happen. Now, I am not bagging IPART. They have a very difficult job. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They're stuck with procedures and processes that aren't adequate, and certainly aren't adequate in a high inflation environment, certainly aren't adequate in an unpredictable environment like we've seen post-COVID. So I'm not bagging them one little bit, but they did make a mistake, just as did the Reserve Bank of Australia. Remember when they were talking about transitory inflation and not putting up rates to 2024? They're now not talking about those things. Just as was the federal government made a mistake and didn't realise the inflationary effects of what they were doing. Mind you, anyone that studied economics could see it a mile away. Just as was the state government caught wrong-footed. Just as what most of us were caught wrong-footed by all this inflation. If you've gone and done your shopping or filled up your card recently, you've got a nasty surprise, haven't you? So all they needed to do was say, look, we made a mistake. We didn't reckon on the speed of the increase in inflation, the tenacity of the inflation, the war in Ukraine and the other supply shocks with closures down in China and the like. In real terms, what we actually proposed, 0.7%, was actually a tax cut or rate cut, tax take cut to local governments, and we understand that local governments can't possibly take a cut to their revenue and be financially sustainable. Therefore, we're issuing this revised rate peg, which would be a much higher number that would at least match CPI or PPI. That would be the easiest solution. It would avoid the confusion, it would avoid the cost for councillors, avoid the cost for council staff, avoid the confusion and the monetary cost of this whole process. Really simple solution. Let's just admit we got it wrong and reissue a new rate peg. Simple as that. Now, you need to take a lesson when you're communicating with your community about this. Do not talk about how much money you're trying to claw back, how much money you would have lost. The community's not going to understand it. It sounds like you're just on a money grab. My suggestion is to simply say, look, the authorities made a mistake. They've acknowledged that they've made a mistake. They were caught wrong-footed by inflation, as was the federal government, the state government, the Reserve Bank of Australia, and banks, central banks right around the world caught wrong-footed. As a result, we need this adjustment in order to minimize our losses in real terms, because at present what is being proposed as a rate peg will actually result in a total tax take cut to the local government, and clearly it is not sustainable for the local government to do what it does with less money into the next financial year. That is the way I'd present it, as simply as possible. Talking about the mistake, talking about inflation. People get that, they understand it. Watch my video about the real nominal rates, put that up on your council websites. That's the way I'd be projecting this message. And lastly, I'd like to express some concern about the IPART review. We're told by IPART that they've been asked to review the process, and the OLG's also said that they've asked IPART to review the process. And the exact words of these in the IPART document: to review the rate peg methodology to reduce volatility in the rate peg. That is completely the wrong terms of reference for a review of the rate peg. Volatility is not the issue. A rate peg should be volatile in an economically volatile environment. If it's not, it won't be financially sustainable, will it? Volatility is not the issue at all, one little bit. Completely wrong. The thing that needs to be reviewed is the adequacy of the rate peg. We have incorrect processes, incorrect formulas, incorrect methods, and we're coming up with rate pegs that are clearly inadequate. You can see that. CPI of 3.5% and you come up with a rate peg of 0.7%. Clearly it's wrong. Clearly all the processes around it and surrounding it are wrong. Clearly it will result in a financial sustainability disaster. What the review must be focused on is getting the processes and the methodology correct so that rate pegs in the future are adequate. It's absolutely essential we do this for the future of local government communities in New South Wales. So thank you very much for your time. Look, if this video can help anyone, flick it around, please subscribe, pop it up on your council website, use it as a training resource. I don't care. I'm here to help. Help me to help others. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.